Pentagon leaders defended the highest ever military budget, citing China and other eventualities that call for preparedness. The U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin made their case for higher military expenditures during their testimony before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense. They defended Pentagon's record $842 billion budget request by pointing to hotspots of conflict and tension.
In order to protect the American people, readiness now and readiness in the future through modernization is our number one priority, and there is no other number one.
Austin asserted that the U.S. is at its highest state of readiness with capabilities to be deployed within days if needed.
This budget sustains our current readiness and adapts the joint force to the future warfighting requirements. This is a matter of significant national security importance, and we must act with clear-eyed urgency. By doing so, no adversary should ever underestimate the resolve of our nation and the strength of our military. Preparation for war and deterring war is extraordinarily expensive, but it's not as expensive as fighting a war. And this budget prevents war and prepares us to fight it if necessary.
The testimony comes soon after Chinese leader Xi Jinping visit to Moscow for a summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Biden administration has labeled Beijing as a pacing challenge that holds the potential to reshape the international order. The U.S. is reinforcing its military ties with Australia and Japan and holding joint military drills with South Korea with an eye on Seoul's northern neighbors.
This is a strategy-driven budget and one driven by the seriousness of our strategic competition with the People's Republic of China.
Earlier, Secretary of State Antony Blinken at a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing said that the budget contains both discretionary and mandatory proposals for new innovative investments to outcompete China.
President's FY24 budget request for the State Department and USAID meet this moment head on. The budget will sustain our security, economic, energy, and humanitarian support for Ukraine to ensure that President Putin's war remains a strategic failure. The budget will also strengthen our efforts to outcompete the PRC.
Blinken added that the budget will help the U.S. push back on advancing authoritarianism and also strengthening democracies around the world. For more on this, we are joined by retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis. He's a senior fellow at the Military Expert for Defense Priorities. He's also a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel with 21 years of service, including 4 combat deployments. So we take his analysis very seriously. Thank you for your service and for joining us live from Virginia. Colonel, what do you make of all of this and this latest news? It seems that the United States is working around the clock to outcompete China for the most part.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, I'm a little concerned with how we're going about some of this, because the whole idea is supposed to be the defense of the United States national security interests worldwide. But it seems that we spend way more focus on projecting power, especially into the areas around China, than we do with diplomacy. And it doesn't take much comparison to look at our diplomatic budget and the military budget, and they're vastly out of proportion. And I think we should be putting a lot more emphasis on the diplomatic arena, because that's the best place where you can get the most bang for your buck, so to speak, and the most security. And, and things like what happened with China here just in the last 2 days, yesterday and today, with this freedom of navigation operations in the U.S. guided missile destroyer into the area around where China claims its sovereignty over some islands. Now, there's plenty of dispute over that, and that's something many other countries actually also dispute. But you have to ask the question, how does this advance American national security or those of our allies when we constantly send these ships into close proximity with the PLA warships and airplanes? And I argue that that's not necessarily a good thing for us to do on a routine basis.
And Colonel, what steps should the United States be taking right now? It seems that there is no appetite for de-escalation. We're talking about China right now, but then you look at the war in Ukraine and relations with Russia as well. It just doesn't seem like there's an appetite for de-escalation in any of these regions right now when it comes to the foreign policy agenda of the Biden administration, at least, and many on Capitol Hill, even some Republicans.
Yeah, you're 100% right. There's no question about that. And in both of those two theaters you just mentioned there, both the Indo-Pacific and in the European theater around the Russia-Ukraine war, really the only thing we've been doing is to, quote, show strength. And look, there's a time for strength. I mean, I as you pointed out, I served 21 years in the service. I've fought in 4 separate combat environments, and I'm the first one that'll tell you that we need to have a strong military, and we need to be ready to use it to decisive effect. However, there is a time and a place for it, and the priority should be using diplomacy and seeking to de-escalate. We should not be just blanket sending weapons and ammunition and money to Ukraine to keep that war going. We should be looking for ways to end the war, end the suffering. Similarly, in the Pacific area, we should be doing far more to try to engage China on a diplomatic front to try to resolve some of these difficulties and some of these challenges that we have, as opposed to expressly, for example, in the Philippines, accounting for 4 additional bases, military bases we can use, expanding military operations on Guam, expanding military cooperation with Japan in some of those areas here. Of course, China regards all that as a threat, and then they also ratchet up their military activities, and then they expand their military capacity. So you have both sides trying to one up the other, and that doesn't lead anywhere good, and it certainly doesn't provide security for anyone.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for joining us on WION, and we look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.